This week's surveillance report covers Microsoft removing offline Windows activation. Again, another method, so we are going to talk about that and what it means for Windows. California's new tool to delete your data from brokers in one of the most awesome updates I've had to cover about the data broker industry. Cryptocurrency thefts traced back to a 2022 LastPass data breach, France's social media ban and age verification as a whole, and a lot more. Welcome, everybody, to the Techlore Surveillance Report, your essential weekly tech news delivering deep analysis on the latest threats to your security, privacy, and digital freedom, and empowering you to reclaim control and defend your rights. I'm really excited to be here, and let's dive into the highlight story. A bit of context before we really dive into the news here. Microsoft has been really pushing people to have to activate using a Microsoft account on Windows 11. Beforehand, you could just not connect your computer to the internet when you set it up, or you could just say, I don't want to set up my Windows installation with a Microsoft account if you wanted to opt out of using Microsoft services. But they've been slowly over the years making this harder and harder, with Windows 11 being kind of the final boss of this kind of pattern that Microsoft has been pushing on users. Now, for the record, there still are ways to do it, but this is just one more lifeline that has been cut out that makes it somewhat easy for regular people to get around the Microsoft account requirement. Now, you might be wondering, why does Microsoft care about this? Well, it's probably many factors, but nowadays with Microsoft, they really rely on you using their ecosystem and using their products to make extra money. And so when you use the Microsoft ecosystem, you use their Edge, you use Bing Rewards, you play Xbox, etc. If you actually use that Microsoft ecosystem, there's a lot more for them to gain from you financially, as well as any kind of data that you upload to their services. But a lot of users don't want to use Microsoft services because, let's be real, it's kind of crap for most people, and most people don't like Microsoft's ecosystem. So instead of doing the natural thing and just making their products a little bit better and making them more enticing to use, they're just trying to force it onto people. So this newest method that they removed has to do with the phone option. And so pretty much there was a activate by phone option in the Windows settings that users say call the activation number. This gives you an automated message and it takes you to a Microsoft product activation portal. And instead of providing an activation code by phone, the process appears to be pushed to a web-based flow, which leaves the old offline path unusable. So there's a couple layers to this. There's the first path, which is that Microsoft just wants you to be connected to the internet and have to activate Windows and do all these different things so that you can actually have a properly working Windows installation. And of course, a lot of this has to do with also getting you involved in the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, a different angle here is that a lot of people might not have internet access. This is basic accessibility stuff. And there's a reason why when you set up a new Linux computer, there's no internet access required. Same with MacBooks. You can set up a MacBook without needing to be internet connected. So I also see this as an accessibility issue. If somebody needs to connect to the internet to just set up a computer, now you don't really just have to buy a computer. You have to buy a computer. You also have to have available internet access. So maybe for those people, if you are one of those people, now you have to go to a coffee shop, you have to buy a coffee, and you have to connect to their public Wi-Fi. So this is just another push forward from Microsoft to have to demand a user account and demand that you all, well, give up a little bit of data and start implementing a few more of Microsoft services by default. Defaults really matter, and I think that's what Microsoft is really leaning into, and that's what they're trying to take control over. That's why they make Edge the default browser. That's why they make it super hard for you to change a third-party browser in Windows, and that's why sometimes when you just update Windows, it actually resets your default browser. It's pretty horrendous stuff that they do behind the scenes. I don't know how they get away with it when a few decades ago, Microsoft was sued for just installing a browser, their own browser, on an operating system, and that was considered behavior that Monopoly would do. And now they do so many worse things than that without any consequences. And yes, that is the main story here. So some actionable things for all of you. First off, if you can avoid Windows, try to. I would make many arguments for why macOS is far better than Windows, even from a user freedom perspective. But I think, of course, many of us listening are going to be thinking of Linux, and I think Linux is also probably the best alternative from a user freedom perspective and probably the most privacy respecting out of the box. With that said, if you do have to use Windows, I personally found the easiest way to get around a lot of this stuff is to download Rufus, R-U-F-U-S, if you're an audio listener, and if you're in video, you can see it on screen. And what this allows you to do is there's a little check mark when you're setting it up, which is a configuration setting, and you can actually actually say bypass online Microsoft requirement when you set up a new installation media on a USB drive, for example. So this is what I found to be the easiest. And then also there's manual workarounds and there's commands you can type in to try to get around this stuff. But I do personally find this to be the easiest path for most of you. Microsoft is enshittifying at a rate that I didn't even know was possible, because instead of focusing on just making their user experience better, they're more focused on just shoving Copilot down your face everywhere they can. And it is quite frustrating. In fact, now they're even trying to make Edge, their browser, look a little bit more like Copilot, which has people speculating that it's going to be Copilot riddled as well. So just know that when you're on Windows or Microsoft, there really is nothing left that's sacred or safe anymore. And trust me, it's not like Apple's innocent with Tahoe either, but I do just think that Microsoft's rate at which they're making things worse is just actually unfathomable. And then they'll just go online and say, yeah, it's not a big deal. And that is it on Microsoft. So now I want to talk about Californians, but not just Californians, but also other states in the US and how this might impact them, as well as other countries. What we see when we see stories like this is that someone tries something new and then it's modeled in other places around the world. So this actually could come to a region near you. So a little bit of context before we get into this. And if you listen to this podcast, this is nothing new because our main sponsor on this podcast, Easy Opt-out, literally tries to deal with this problem. So the data broker industry, what they do is they collect data from social media accounts. They try to collect random data from different websites, depending on the analytics on those websites. And they try to essentially centralize this information to dedicated profiles. So if you go online and type in your first and last name, it's very possible that where you live, your family members, and even like weird social scores on some of these sites can be found in just a basic search engine. And this is a way that you can source information from pretty much anyone out there, because most people won't do anything against this problem. Now, this alone is pretty concerning for people, but what's even more concerning is how this data is collected and how little transparency exists in what is called the data broker industry. Now, this industry is kind of crazy. They source data from places they shouldn't. They try to correlate information between different areas. And a lot of times they use centralized data points like your email that you use on every website, as well as your first and last name, your address, etc. Up until now, this has been probably overall the worst problem in the US because we have no federal privacy regulation and very few states have any privacy regulation against this. And so it's been a little bit less of a problem in places like Europe. But now California is trying to do at least something about it. So this is a bit of an update to something that California did a couple years ago, which is called the California's Delete Act, which required data brokers to provide residents with a means to obtain a copy of all data pertaining to them and to demand that such information be deleted. But they found that almost nobody utilized this because it was inconvenient to do. So now on January 1st, which means this year, a new law known as DROP, which is the Delete Request and Opt-out Platform, took effect. What DROP does is it allows Californian residents to register a single demand for their data to be deleted and no longer collected in the future. Cal Privacy then forwards it to all data brokers. It's almost, if I had to describe this, it's like a California-run version of something like Easy Opt-outs, which is fully free and accessible to anybody in California. So I'm showing you all on screen what this looks like, and I'll try to do my best to make it obvious for audio listeners. You just go to consumer.drop.privacy.ca.gov, and I'll try to leave that linked in the show notes. Then you click accept. You have to be a California resident to do this. You do have to still upload your personal information as you do with all of these services, or you can log in using login.gov if you already have your personal information on login.gov. But as you all see, you can just do it with your regular personal information, and it's going to ask for first and last name, date of birth, address that you currently live at, phone or email, and then from there, it'll probably continue on and ask you for different things. The author of the Ars Technica article also said that the site prompted them to enter personal information like their names and email addresses that they use, and specific information such as VIN numbers and advertising IDs from phones, TVs, and other devices. They said it required about 15 minutes to complete the form, but most of that time was spent pulling the data from different places and going into their settings and just collecting the information. So this is very big news, everybody. This is important because yes, it's awesome for Californians, but this means that California is trying to do something about the data broker industry, which up until now has kind of just been left to do whatever the hell they want. So this gives Californians a few more rights and ability to actually tackle this. So what does this mean, right? Now, we have a sponsor on this podcast, Easy Opt-outs, and I'll talk about them because I still think they have a role to play here. But first off, if you're in California, I think I would comfortably say you don't need to use something like Easy Opt-outs if you maybe combine this with the free method. Now, keep in mind, I believe, and I don't know if it actually says this in the article here, but I think this won't actually apply until June of this year, if I remember off the top of my head. Yes, it says here on a TechCrunch article, brokers are supposed to start processing requests in August of 2026. Then they have 90 days to actually process requests and report back. If they don't delete your data, you'll have the option to submit additional information that may help them locate your records. So that's the first thing, is this has theoretically a 6-month delay in terms of when it'll actually take place. The second thing is it's quite new, and we haven't actually seen the efficacy of this, right? Like we saw the Consumer Reports research come out a few years ago that showed that many of these more commercialized data removal services out there don't actually do very much. And the two that did the best were Easy Opt-outs and Optory. And so it was kind of rare for one of these services to do a good job. So I guess it's to be seen how well this one's going to perform. However, I think the fact that this is free and the fact that this probably is a little bit more serious on a legal side of things means that data brokers are probably going to take this a bit more seriously. And so I'm going to add an asterisk of this is my current advice, and until we get more information, then this might evolve. But I will say for Californians, I would still recommend doing this, and then also maybe doing the manual method. And if you want some kind of safety net, or you just want to have a different set of eyes on it until we get more information, try using Easy Opt-outs. I am based in California, and I have yet to do this myself. I've been an Easy Opt-outs customer for a long time, and so I think I might do both. I'm going to use Easy Opt-outs and this, and then if this shows to actually be more effective, then I'm going to drop Easy Opt-outs. So that's how I'm approaching this. Now, if you're outside of California, the options are still kind of going the manual route, and if you go that route, I recommend using the Big Ass Data Broker opt-out list. Yes, that's a long name, but I'll try to leave that in the show notes, and it's run by actually the same person who helped conduct the research from Consumer Reports. They kind of compiled a lot of those manual options that you have to do it yourself. The problem with that is that you have to do it yourself, and it can take a long time to do it yourself, and that is not necessarily a one-time thing. It's not uncommon for your data to end up back on those people searching websites. And so I do typically recommend using an automated service if you care about saving your time, especially now with something like Easy Opt-outs. That's $20 a year. Of course, there is also Optory, and I have a free Optory account that I've been using, but do keep in mind Optory, if you do pay for it, is going to be quite a bit more expensive than Easy Opt-outs, but it has been shown to be just as effective. So yes, I know Easy Opt-outs is a sponsor of this podcast, but they're not really sponsoring this episode, and these are my true personal thoughts, and this is what I'm going to be sharing with my friends and family who live in California as well. So proceed with what you feel the most comfortable with. Some of you will probably only prefer the DIY method, but it has a lot of time commitment, and I know some of you might prefer a more automated method, and in that case, I'd say you have Optory and Easy Opt-outs, and if you're in California, you can also start testing this out as well, but we don't really have any signs or evidence of how well it's going to work yet. So let's just be patient with that and see what happens. What I really do love about this, though, is that this is going to set some massive precedent, and I'm really hoping that other states see what's going on, copy this, and actually make it so that maybe we'll have closer to something federal where, at least in the US, people have a lot more access to tools that make it easier to remove their information. Because right now, I pretty much just have those two options for you guys. I have like 2 services I can recommend you to do it automatically, and I have the manual way. So it would be awesome to recommend other things that are free and automated. All right, we still have France trying to ban minors from social media platforms, as well as a ton of age verification stuff, and then our typical digital rights bulletin. But in the meantime, we have kind of a weird update to something that happened a few years ago. Now, a few years ago, LastPass, the password manager, suffered a data breach, and it was a pretty bad data breach because it did actually impact some sensitive stuff in the password manager. Now, a quick note on this. Password managers, for most people, in fact, I would argue for almost everybody, are a more secure way of storing your passwords in theory. It means you're able to generate strong, secure, and unique passwords for each website out there in a convenient way that's stored in a secure place. The problem here is that LastPass just did a really bad job. They didn't actually implement good security practices, and it made it very easy for these attackers to gain access to their users' data. LastPass does not have a super positive history, so I want to start right off by saying that password managers are still a very secure way to store your passwords and use them properly. Just make sure you're using a trusted password manager. The ones that I really like to recommend to people is 1Password if you want kind of a family-friendly approach, Bitwarden if you want something that's open source and maybe a little bit less well-regarded for their UI UX, and then I'd say ProtonPass is a nice blend. I personally like ProtonPass the best, but all of our audience uses different combination of those three. And if you want something offline, you have KeePass, which is offline by default and fully open source. With that said, in 2022, this data breach allowed attackers to breach its systems and compromised a developer environment and stole portions of the company's source code and proprietary technical information. And then, in a later security incident, the hackers breached the cloud storage firm Go2 using previously stolen credentials and stole LastPass database backups that were stored on the platform. For some customers, these encrypted password vaults not only contain credentials, but also cryptocurrency wallet private keys and seed phrases. So while the vaults were encrypted, users with weak or reused master passwords were vulnerable to offline cracking, which is believed to have been ongoing since the breach. And an important thing here, it's because of how LastPass was actually encrypting those vaults and encrypting user data that makes it possible to do this. If LastPass was using a bit stronger defaults for users, which they did fix after this issue, it wouldn't really matter how long or complex your master password was because it would still be protected. But since LastPass didn't do that, now it kind of was up to how good of the passwords that people generated are. So there was a report published last week, and TRM is an organization that's been researching this, and they said that there is an ongoing cryptocurrency theft attack that's been traced to the abuse of the encrypted LastPass password vault stolen in 2022. And the pattern that they're seeing here isn't that just everything was just drained day one of this data breach. It's still happening months and years later, very slowly, which illustrates how the attackers are gradually decrypting vaults and extracting stored credentials from these vaults. Now, one interesting thing actually, and this is a bit unrelated to the story, so I'll go back to the story in a second, but TRM actually told Bleeping Computer that the most significant part of the research was the ability to trace stolen funds even after they're remixed using Wasabi Wallet's CoinJoin feature. Now, what's very interesting here, for those who don't know, is that there are kind of two approaches that I've seen in the cryptocurrency world. You have services that just try to be privacy respecting by default, and that's probably most likely going to be Monero for most users. And then you also have people who think that they can mix or make Bitcoin more private via all these crazy workarounds and all this extra effort. I, based on the way I'm communicating this, will very much lean towards the first. I think you should use something that isn't transparent by default, which is Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has a feature called CoinJoin, and they pretty much have said they were able to trace this all via CoinJoin. And so if you are a user using CoinJoin and you think you have good privacy, something to look into there. Now, to get back to the actual story, if you were impacted in this LastPass data breach, I know we're 3 years down the road, but if you had any kind of private keys or sensitive things on LastPass when this happened, and nothing has happened to you yet, that doesn't quite mean you're in the clear. It could mean that someone still has your vault and they're slowly figuring out how to break into it. And so if you have private keys, what I'd recommend is maybe sending your money to a different wallet that you control so it can get off of that wallet. That's at least a basic thing that you can do, but it's good for any of you who ever use LastPass to do one of two things, if not ideally both, which is make sure that you've changed all the most sensitive account information that you have back in the day. And second, move to a better service. LastPass is just not that good. I have no issue saying that there are better password managers out there that have done a lot more over the years to really reassure us that they treat their user security better than LastPass has. Your password manager, you should have the absolute most trust in, and I would say it has kind of like the smallest amount of wiggle room for. Like, I'm not willing to kind of gamble with a password manager. That's where I'm storing the most sensitive things in my life. That gives me access to the other most sensitive things in my life. And so if there's any kind of thing like this with multiple data breaches, and the data breaches were fairly preventable if they were using best practice internally, I think that this is kind of a no-go, and I do struggle to recommend LastPass to most people. All right, we have France continuing the trend of trying to age verify users and what that entails, which I'll talk about in a second. But in the meantime, I just wanted to quickly share that if you like this podcast, you can support this podcast and keep it going and growing by becoming a Techlorian. And what that gives you is private access to our Signal group. You also get access to exclusive behind the scenes and fun things that we're working on. And yeah, Tori and I are pretty active in that Signal group. And so if you want a little bit more access to us, that's where we're at. Most importantly, though, it supports what we're doing and allowing us to spread digital rights to more and more people. So if you want to be a part of that and you like what we're doing and you want to contribute to it, check out how to become a Techlorian down in the description. It's all through Ghost and directly through Stripe, and you should be able to use whatever alias info you want to use to sign up. Thank you all to our current Techlorians. We've been seeing a lot of signups recently, so thank you, everybody. And now, back to the episode. All right, so we continue on this path. So we've already talked about Australia trying to ban social media platforms from children. We've seen Denmark also propose it, and this is already mostly being proposed almost all around the world at this point, but France is now on that list. And so there's a draft bill that's preventing under 15s from using social media, which will be submitted for legal checks and is expected to be debated in Parliament early in the new year. They want this to come into effect in September of 2026, and it cites the risks of excessive screen use by teenagers, including the dangers of being exposed to inappropriate social media content, online bullying, and altered sleep patterns. The bill states the need to protect future generations from dangers that threaten their ability to thrive and live together in a society with shared values. They're not the only people. It also mentions Denmark, as well as Norway and Malaysia, that are planning very similar things. And in the UK, of course, they're also kind of talking about this. Now, that's pretty much most of the story right now. There aren't a huge amount of updates, but I just want to recap here. Age verification is especially dangerous, and I think it's the main thing we need to watch out for in 2026, because what tends to happen is, first off, many of these implementations to verify users' ages aren't as private and secure as they should probably be. So there's already an inherent risk there, not just for children, but for adults, because the only way to verify who's a child and who's not a child is by age verifying everybody. So that's problem one. Problem two has to do with censorship. And so if we start deciding what kids can and can't access and what requires personal information to access on the internet, it means that it's far easier for an authoritative government to say, okay, we don't want anybody accessing this, or we're going to demand that people submit personal private information for things they probably don't want to be associated with. So in many ways, it is the death of the anonymous internet. The third concern, it sounds like a slippery slope concern, but it actually is already happening in many places. What tends to happen is these, regions, these countries, these states are proposing age verification laws, and a lot of people do not want to comply with them for very legitimate reasons, which include they don't want to submit personal information to access a website. And so what they use is something like a VPN, or they use Tor or any other privacy tool to get around these things. And then governments go, well, we don't want people bypassing these, and so now we're going to ban privacy tools. We're going to ban VPNs, we're going to ban Tor. And this has already been proposed in some US states. It's already being kind of toyed with in the UK. The UK wants to age verify VPN users, as well as demand that the VPN logs all traffic tied to those users. So this is like legitimate stuff being proposed. These aren't just hypothetical slippery slope arguments. These are actually things being proposed all around the world and are going to continue to happen. In fact, the UK isn't just asking to age verify users and put all their traffic, tie their traffic to them. They're also demanding on-device surveillance from both Apple and Google on these devices to scan everything that's going on your device. So very scary stuff. It almost sounds made up. It sounds like I'm making this up, but I'm not. This is kind of what happens when you start trying to control the internet in such a restrictive way that really can't be enforced. You start clinging to things that sound easier to enforce, but it's just invading on your freedoms, and that ultimately is the problem with age verification. And then finally, on this note, it's kind of, combine these two stories. I mentioned that Texas recently, big tech did kind of win in Texas. And a little bit of context there, Texas wanted to age verify apps on the App Store, not just porn, not just social media, no, just apps, period. So calculator apps, camera apps, you had to age verify yourself to just download them in Texas. But big tech sued, and actually so far it's looking pretty good for them. But this Politico article is pretty much talking about how this is just getting started. This is happening in Utah. This is happening in Louisiana. California has a different approach to it, which is a bit more privacy respecting, but they still have it going on there. And now we also have Ohio, Washington, D.C., and many other states in the US that are also trying to target this. So I recommend reading that Politico article if you want to keep up with what's happening in the US. And of course, we'll surely keep putting out content as we see things pop up in the States. So stay subscribed. And of course, if you want to support our coverage of that, you can become a Techlorian so that we can continue doing that coverage. All right, and now we're going to get into our defense bulletin. And as always, this is broken up into two parts. The first part is going to be just the overall threats and things to keep up with and the data breaches. And the second part is just updates for any open source services or any privacy respecting services that many of you likely use. The first threat is that there's a new attack called ClickFix, which is a social engineering campaign, which is targeting the hospitality sector in Europe using a fake Windows blue screen of death screen to trick users into manually compiling and executing malware on their systems. We've actually seen quite a few of these where essentially you click something, you do something, and it's actually doing more nefarious things in the background to trick you into getting something installed or pretty much doing whatever the attacker wants to do. So just keep in mind to install things from trusted places. This was spotted first in December. The ultimate goal is to install a piece of malware, which is a Trojan, and it's commonly used by threat actors for remote access to these infected devices. And so be careful with this. If you start getting a random blue screen of death out of nowhere after you did nothing, keep in mind it could be an actual problem. This next one is quite interesting. I'm not going to dive too far into it, but I did want to give a quick little preview. Pretty much, it's an article from Bleeping Computer, and it's titled, Are Copilot Prompt Injection Flaws Vulnerabilities or AI Limits? So we've seen a lot of coverage in the last several weeks on surveillance report from AI companies, which apparently is just Microsoft. They're just an AI company now because I don't feel comfortable saying they even make a good operating system anymore. Side note, but there's a lot of research coming out that there are prompt injection flaws, which pretty much allow websites to try to, you have this agentic browsing and the website can essentially put things on its website to trick AI models to reveal sensitive information and whatnot. And so anytime this kind of research comes out, you have these AI companies go back and it's like, well, it's just intentional design. We can't really do anything about it. And this is kind of a continuation of that. So Microsoft has once again pushed back against claims that multiple prompt injection and sandbox-related issues raised by a security engineer in its Copilot AI assistant constitute security vulnerabilities. The development highlights a growing divide between how vendors and researchers define risk in generative AI systems. And you can read more about the vulnerabilities in the show notes, but just to summarize a bit at the end here, while Russell, the security researcher, sees prompt injection and sandbox behaviors as exposing meaningful risk, Microsoft treats them as expected limitations unless they cross a clear security boundary, such as enabling unauthorized access or data exfiltration. That gap in how AI risk is defined is likely to remain a recurring point of friction as these tools become more widely deployed in enterprise environments. So what does this mean for you all? It means that these AI companies that are rolling out tools that have been shown to have very clear issues, whether or not you want to call them a vulnerability, don't really care about them and see them as a real issue. Until they do and start taking this problem seriously, I have only one option, which is to recommend all of you to be very careful with these tools and to probably avoid them unless you're well aware of the risks and are somehow taking necessary precautions to avoid these risks, which frankly, I don't know what that advice even looks like. I don't know what necessary precautions means because this seems like to me a pretty unavoidable problem of using any kind of really hardcore agentic AI or using an AI browser or anything like that. And so personally for me, if you want to experiment with these things, if you want to have them on a second device that doesn't have any sensitive data, I think that might be okay, but I would not really trust this stuff right now for any kind of mission critical work that involves very sensitive information. Until we know more, until there's more safeguards, until there's more protections in place, until these companies start actually taking it seriously, I would just be very cautious with this. All right, China hacked email systems of U.S. Congressional Committee staffers, and that's from the FT, which is the Financial Times. This group is from Salt Typhoon, which is not a new name here on this podcast. They've done a lot of attacks on U.S. soil, but they accessed email systems used by some staffers in the House China Committee, as well as aides on panels covering foreign affairs, intelligence, and the armed services. And yes, it does not specify which specific staffers were targeted, but that is mostly all the information we have. They are also the people who were behind that huge huge infrastructure breach of cellular providers way back in the day. So Verizon, etc. Their entire infrastructure was pretty much taken over by Salt Typhoon for a week. And for a week, we just saw the government go, yeah, we don't really know what to do. We don't know where they are. We don't know how to take it back. And it all was done because of a backdoor in our infrastructure. All right, Covenant Health says a May data breach impacted nearly 478,000 patients. So this is a health organization. The fun part about this data breach is they had to revise the amount of people impacted. So back in July, they reported that it only impacted 7,800 people, but now they're saying, oh, it was actually like 500,000 people, which is a very different kind of disclosure. Beginning December 31st, the organization started mailing data breach notification letters to patients whose information may have been compromised in the May intrusion. So if you are impacted by this, you will be notified. But keep in mind, you don't typically know about this stuff until months after it happens. It's very rare for a company to handle a data breach very well and cleanly and fast. And so this is pretty common, unfortunately. So just make sure you're really taking into consideration preventative measures rather than reactive measures. Okay, this one is very frustrating for me for many reasons, but Ledger, which is the hardware wallet for cryptocurrencies, was impacted by a third-party Global E data breach. Global E is apparently its own phrase, but this is a third-party payment processor. Now, of course, they say the platform's hardware and software systems remain secure because this impacted a third party. So if you have a Ledger wallet, there's no immediate concern here. This is a serious problem, and they are downplaying this issue for one very notable reason, which is that people who buy hardware wallets for cryptocurrency can be storing a lot of money on them. And now there is a verifiable list of people who purchase these devices that anybody can purchase. This means if you ever purchase the Ledger, and you have a lot of money in that Ledger, at least, maybe not everybody, but if you are concerned about this, yeah, we've been seeing a huge uptick in like kidnappings and other things happening where people are individually targeted that might be large crypto holders. And so this is a serious problem there. And this is something you have to think about when you're buying something like a cryptocurrency hardware wallet. You have to think about the fact this is a pay trail that leads the purchase back to you. And so I do highly recommend, if you do have to buy a cryptocurrency hardware wallet, you have a few options here. One, buy it with privacy in mind, right? Just ship it to a mailbox, maybe ship it under a different name, and you can use privacy.com. You can use whatever the tools are out there to buy it privately. You can do that. The second thing, I didn't know this until recently, but you can actually buy some of these devices in person. I believe Best Buy now actually carries hardware wallets. And so I think you can buy Ledger at Best Buy. Don't at me on that, but if someone wants to fact check me in the YouTube comments, please let me know. But I'm fairly certain of this. And the third thing is I'm currently phasing out of my role at Cake Wallet. And so I have no reason to say this, but it can be Cake Wallet. I know Monarujo has a Sidekick app as well, but this is a really compelling reason to use one of these Sidekick applications. And so the general principle is the same, which is you get a device and it's where all of your keys are stored offline on a separate device, which you can keep offline. And so Monarujo has their Sidekick app. And what this does is you can pretty much set up an old phone that's sitting in your drawer, and you set up the app on your phone, and then that is where all your keys are stored. And you need to have that second device to actually send your funds from the initial device. And so it actually copies a lot of the threat model and the security practices of a hardware wallet like Ledger, but it does it in an open source app that you can use on hardware you already own. And so if you really need anonymity and you can't have anyone knowing that you use cryptocurrency for whatever reason, this probably does guarantee you the most amount of anonymity because it's all stored on just an old phone in your drawer, which doesn't really raise any suspicion and doesn't require any kind of pay trail tied back to you. And of course, Cake Wallet now has Cupcake as well. And I believe Monarujo's is also open source. And so those are a couple alternative options if any of you want extra security for your cryptocurrency. Up next, a US broadband provider, which is called Brightspeed, is investigating breach claims. So this is one of the largest fiber providers out there, and they're investigating the security breach. We don't have much confirmed information so far. The attackers claim to have over 1 million customers' information, which includes a lot of sensitive stuff, but none of this seems to be ultra confirmed yet, and I'm sure we're going to get updates, so stay subscribed for more. Sedgwick confirmed a data breach at a government contractor subsidiary. So Sedgwick is a government solutions that doesn't really explain what they do, but they provide services for CISA, the Department of Commerce, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, the United States Coast Guard, the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Labor, the Customs and Border Protection, and the U.S. Coast Guard. Now, they're currently investigating this, and they have notified law enforcement, and the attacker said they stole over 3 gigabytes, but that's kind of all we have. So if we learn more, I'll be sure to update you all. This next one is a data breach that impacts the Illinois Health Department, and they exposed 700,000 residents' personal data for years. This is for the state of Illinois in the US, and they said in a statement that an internal mapping website containing residents' personal information was exploited. This is for Medicaid and Medicare Saving Program recipients, and it includes their addresses, case numbers, and demographic data, but not individual names. So check that out if you want to learn more. This next one is ironic. Breach Forums, which, yes, is a forum for data breaches, was breached, exposing 324,000 accounts. Definitely a nice twist of irony, and if you want to learn more, check out the show notes. OwnCloud, which is a cloud provider, has warned to enable MFA after a credential theft report came out. So they have over 200 million users worldwide, including enterprise and public sector organizations, and they are recommending all of those users to enable MFA and even reset all user passwords and invalidate all active sessions to force reauthentication and review access logs for suspicious activity, which comes after a known threat actor has been offering to sell corporate data stolen from dozens of companies, likely obtained after breaching their ShareFile, Nextcloud, and OwnCloud instances. So even if you use ShareFile or Nextcloud, I would still dig into this a little bit to see if you're impacted. And now we're going to get into the updates, but first, a bit of an aside. I'm not going to get into this. It's very quick, but 3 articles I wanted to share with you all. And they're just guides. The first one is a beginner's guide to Mastodon, which is the open source Twitter alternative. It talks about the Mastodon lingo, what is Mastodon, how the Fediverse works, the many branches of the Fediverse, and other things that aren't Mastodon like PeerTube, PixelFed, etc. By the way, we are on PeerTube, so you can watch all of our content, including this podcast, at techlore.tv. So make sure to subscribe there. So I think this is amazing, and it's a great starting point if you want to get into the open source alternative world to Twitter. The second guide is from Wired, and it's 8 WhatsApp features to boost your security and privacy. And so I'm not going to say I recommend WhatsApp. I don't use WhatsApp. I recommend migrating away from WhatsApp when you can. But if for whatever reason you're stuck on WhatsApp and you need to use it, check out this guide and also share it with people you know who are on WhatsApp to at least make them a little bit more secure and private on that platform. The third guide is also from Wired, and it's titled How to Protest Safely in the Age of Surveillance. And they just talk about different things to think about, like your phone, your face, your online footprint, and what to do regarding all of those things. And I'm currently working on a similar digital protection guide, which will reference this a little bit as well, but I think will be quite a bit more thorough. So you will have some kind of actionable video that you can use for protesting and anything else. And now for updates to many of the services you all probably use. This one's pretty exciting. So Brave has overhauled their ad block engine inside of the Brave browser, cutting its memory consumption by 75%. These performance boosts are live in Brave version 1.85 with additional optimizations coming in Brave 1.86. I love better efficiency. I love better battery. I love better memory management. And so I love, these aren't sexy updates, but I think they're really sexy for me personally. This gets me going. This one is kind of just an interesting update. I don't know if it's going to impact many of you, but Microsoft is pretty much saying they may soon allow IT admins to just fully uninstall Copilot as just an easy thing, as an easy policy to trigger. I don't know why this wasn't originally a thing, because I'm sure there's many companies that don't want anything to do with this. So I'm glad they're finally taking that into consideration. And who knows? Maybe they'll release something similar for end users. I'm holding my breath. Don't let me down, Microsoft. You know I can't hold my breath that long. Okay, next up, Manjaro 26.0 launches with Linux kernel 6.18, GNOME 49, KDE Plasma 6.5, and updated software. Manjaro is Arch-based, and they try to make Arch a little bit more accessible to use, and for some reason is one of the most controversial Linux distros you can ever talk about in any context, but they have all these updates. And so if you like Manjaro, well, check it out. Okay, this one is a little bit out there, but I still wanted to include it as just a showcase because Pebble, yes, Pebble has rebooted its thinnest smartwatch with the Pebble Round 2. And I think it looks pretty cool. Like, look at these if you're on the video, they look pretty slick. And of course, check out the show notes if you want to see them if you're in the audio version. And it's just really cool. It's like retro, but still smart. And you might be wondering, Henry, why are you bringing this up? Well, because Pebble OS, which is the operating system running on this, is fully open source. And so if you want an open source, fully capable, slick smartwatch, this actually isn't a terrible option. So check out the Pebble and maybe it resonates with you. I don't really like smartwatches that much, but yeah, I know a lot of you do. And so check that out. It's another option to throw your way. This is another unexpected win here, but Bose, the sound company, open sources its SoundTech home theater smart speakers ahead of end of life. A little bit of context here on why I'm sharing this. A lot of times these companies have proprietary firmware, proprietary software, and these proprietary devices that they want to keep their own. And I kind of get it, right? Like they don't care about what's doing the best for the ecosystem. They just want to do what's best for them. They're profit driven. I get it, right? Like I understand why they do this stuff. But what I don't understand is when they pretty much stop supporting those devices. They're like, okay, we're not pushing out updates anymore. We're not selling this device. But those users are kind of just left in the dark at that point. They stop pushing security updates. They become insecure software. So a lot of the community asks, why not just open source your old stuff? And that's exactly what Bose has actually done in kind of a rare thing that I don't see happen too often. So they are open sourcing it, which means that theoretically the community can come forward and continue making changes to the firmware and software of this device. Now, it's not perfect. They still are discontinuing some things that people will probably be sad about, but hey, I actually think that this is not a bad little compromise for these companies. I don't know anything about gaming, but I thought this might be relevant to some of you. NVIDIA is to launch a native Linux and Fire TV app for its GeForce Now cloud gaming service. So theoretically, you can cloud game via NVIDIA on Linux natively, which is maybe cool. I don't know. Maybe there's already a workaround there. I'm not a gamer. And finally, on the Linux front, there is something called Arch Boot, which, as far as I can tell, makes it easy to install Linux, Arch Linux, I should say. And they've expanded their desktop lineup by adding Cosmic as well. It seems like Cosmic has been getting quite popular. I've been covering many stories of people integrating Cosmic recently. So if you do like the Cosmic desktop environment, you can now use it via Arch Boot and get Arch along the way. And then you can leave comments on my videos saying, I use Arch, by the way, because I guess that's what happens when you install Arch. And that is all I have for the week, everybody. I want to thank you all for listening. It is always a pleasure to be here, and that concludes this week's Techlore Surveillance Report. If this analysis this week helped you reclaim control, please, again, consider becoming a Techlorean by visiting the link in the show notes. It really does help us out, and it also supports tips, so you can just send a one-off tip. You won't get any perks, but we have also seen a huge uptick in those of you sending tips in the last several weeks, and so thank you all for that very much. And if you're not able to, or if you just don't want to support us financially, you can still support this podcast by leaving a rating on Spotify, on Apple, by giving a like on YouTube. You can hype videos now on YouTube, and let me tell you, I have no idea how that works or what it does, but apparently it might help us. You can also share this episode around to spread digital freedom to those around you, as well as on social communities and different places around there. We don't do any marketing or advertising. It's just two of us back here behind the scenes. And so any word of mouth is very appreciated. We'll see you next week for the next surveillance report. Thank you all for listening.